I think we're recording. Excellent. All right. You all set?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
All right. So, everybody, I have a very special surprise for you. I have a very special guest here, somebody who I've been a humongous fan of for years, the great Clint Cearley, fantasy illustrator. And we got in touch with each other a little while back, wanting very much to collaborate with each other because I, for one, very much value his thoughts and his opinions on things. I listen to him all the time. I'm a huge fan. And Clint is somebody who's really helped very much through his own productions, through his own videos, really guide me artistically and guide my career. And Clint, to have you on my channel today is a huge treat. Thank you for that.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's honestly a dream come true to have you here. And what we thought of doing, was to collaborate our thoughts on a couple of big topics that a lot of artists really tend to scratch their heads over. So we kind of pulled together a couple of ideas, and unscripted, we just go at it and just chat about different subjects and share our different thoughts and feelings. And how does that sound to you?
I think it's great. Yeah. So, no, this time I actually have somebody to talk to and not just a camera. So I think this is a good change.
I know I'm always shooting off my mouth. And as you know that I have a gift of the gab. Definitely. I love the opportunity to be able to share my thoughts with you. So thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And here, let's grab our first topic here out of the pile. And this is a good one. This is a hot topic that a lot of artists get in touch with both of us to talk about and to share our thoughts and feelings about. And that is, how does an artist know when they're ready to start looking for work? And I could add to that and say, when are you ready for the professional domain? When are you ready to start taking your art to a professional level and actually start pursuing jobs, right? So I will leave the floor to you. Let me. You can open up the conversation.
Yeah, great question, because it is such a popular one. It comes up in practically every week in my SWATCHES group or the channel, whatever. Yeah. So with that, there's a couple of things that come to mind. And one of them is consistency. Yeah. Where a novice artist has the potential to do a really good piece, but they also have a potential to do pretty poor pieces as well. Yeah. And you really don't want to step your foot into the professional ring until you can consistently do a level of work. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to do stellar work, like best in the industry, but it does mean that you need to be able to do it consistently, because as soon as your rent payment is dependent on you being able to do this,
reality kicks in. Yeah.
You don't have the luxury of not being able to keep up to a certain level. Yeah. Have you seen that? I mean, you know how it is. When you start paying your bills with this money from your commissions, then there is this added stress.
As soon as you realize that you're actually, wow, I'm actually going to start working for a company. You're going to start working in a studio, or somebody's hiring you to do work. The first few times that I received work, I was hired, anxiety kicked in really quickly. And I went, oh my God, I have to do really good stuff all the time. And there was a panic that came in, because when you're tucked away in a safe zone, when you're doing your stuff, you're noodling around with your own work, you have the luxury of screwing things up. You have the luxury of not doing anything for a couple of weeks and coming back. Now, all of a sudden, you have a deadline. Now, all of a sudden, there's somebody who's got expectations of you, and it can at first, and very often is, I'd say for most artists, is a scary moment, right? Yes. So, from my perspective, what is one of the things that really helped me overcome that? And I think the big one was having a method. Yes. Having a very definitive method in saying, start like this. This is how I'm going to brainstorm. This is how I'm going to do my loose sketch. This is how I'm going to block in the values and the colors. This is how I'm going to apply the lighting. And this is how I'm going to apply the detail later on. Right? I think probably one of the hardest things, and let me know what you think about this as well, is the early phase, the planning phase. I found that at the beginning, I didn't plan much. I just kind of jumped into it thinking the quicker I jump into a piece, the faster it's going to be done. And it was actually the opposite. Spending more time at the early phase of a painting and really getting that planning in and really having confidence moving forward with a piece really helped to reassure me that I was on the right track. You know what I mean?
Oh, well, completely.
Yeah.
And you're right. I would say that the more experienced you are, the more you realize the early phase is more important.
Yeah.
Once you have decent rendering skills, you'll realize that most images succeed or fail in the first 20% of the process.
Yeah.
And that's really where you want to be spending most of your time.
Yeah.
And you're talking about kind of your workflow or your process. I mean, what is the steps that you're going through in order to do a painting?
Yeah.
And it goes back to the whole like reinventing the wheel thing.
Right.
If you're trying to invent a new process or the wheel every time you start a new painting, then yeah, you're going through trial and error every single time to make any advancements. But if you go into going, well, I start by doing this, and then I do this, and then I work on my values, and then I add the colors. And it doesn't mean you have to necessarily have to do it exactly the same every time, but you should have a framework that you can work from.
Yeah.
And it cuts out so much of that trial and error. Yeah. And it also gives you more peace.
Yeah.
It gives you a more sense of a control.
Yeah.
So that really helps you not to flounder around so much and waste time.
Yeah. And that comes back to your consistency thing, right? When you have a set method, what you produce and how you produce it starts to follow a certain flow. And I would add to what's important about consistency as well is that you're predictable as an artist to your employers. I think one of the things that really plagued me at the early phase of my career was I was so experimental all the time that after I finished producing a work of art, the process of getting there to that finished result was so all over the place that if somebody hired me a couple of months later to produce a piece of art and said, Adam, I really love that piece. Could you do that for me? It scared the crap out of me because to me, I forgot how I did it. And in great degree, I forgot how I did it. So when it came down to actually painting it, it was almost like I was trying to emulate somebody else's style. It was so foreign from one piece to the next were so different, and you wouldn't be able to, I was very incapable of recapturing the process. And that again led to, stretching past deadline or struggling to get a certain look, that kind of idea. I would ask you, since you've done a lot of stuff for Magic the Gathering and, you've produced many works of art for them, do you find that there's a certain process in producing a card art that you find really works for you, a certain flow of production that really works for you artistically?
Well, yeah, I have several. I mean, yeah, I have the general steps of, you start out with your reading the brief.
Right.
And figure out, okay, what are the hallmarks of this I really need to convey? How can I do that visually? And anybody that's worked from a brief realizes it's easy to write some things that are extremely difficult to actually draw.
Yeah.
And you should do some brainstorming there at the beginning so that you know how you're actually going to handle some of the sticky points in the rendering process. So yeah, I have a couple of different ones where it might be like, okay, block it out in grayscale and then add color and then do a painting on top of that. Or maybe I just go in with full color, or maybe I, don't even do a line drawing. There's a handful of different ways I approach it, but I also see those as kind of tools that you would have in your toolkit.
Right.
Because I know for myself, no matter how good you get, you're going to have artist block.
Yeah.
And you're going to start trying to render this scene, and it's just not going to come together. You can't get your head around it. So for me, one of the ways I get around it is changing the approach. Okay, so instead of doing line drawing, I'm going to just start using blocks of color. And then I'll do it that way. Or maybe I'll start with a background image that will give me some colors and values to work with, and I'll start pulling off of those. And that's a way that you can kind of circumvent or detour around artist block.
Yeah.
And having multiple processes that you can use to approach that, that I find helpful. So yeah, there's probably about 3 different ones that I use commonly for the magic images, and they work pretty consistently for me.
I like hearing you say that you don't just grab one particular technique. And that's something too that I relearn. It's something that I keep learning is sometimes when I'm working on a certain type of painting, doing a loose line sketch is the way to go. And sometimes working on a painting, taking on a little bit more of a bit of a darken approach where he kind of blocks in some values and tries to find shapes in the clouds type of idea. Sometimes it's very tight and graphic. And yeah, I can see that. And I think just hearing you verbalize that it's a toolkit, it's not just a one set method, kind of helps you relax into the process a little bit more and say, okay, if this doesn't work, if I can't get my creative juices going this way, then I can try that way instead, right? And that's a big deal to me. Yeah. Just
well, I feel like if we have sports players, like in American football, the coach is out there and he's calling plays for the field. Yeah. Right. Well, the running's not working. We got to throw, or we need to do a fake, or they can change up the strategy. The whole thing is still get the ball down the field, but you're doing different plays in order to try to get past the obstacle of course, in that case, the other team. So yeah, that's good. Another thing that comes to mind is portfolio. If you don't have a properly filled out portfolio, you probably shouldn't be looking for work. Just because you've produced maybe 2 good pieces, that's not real reassuring to a potential client. They want to see, like, give me 8, give me 10, give me 12 images so I know what you're actually capable of. So if you're able to start doing 2 or 3 good pieces, great, keep going. But you need to fill that out, flush that out, and show that you're more experienced than just a 2-piece artist.
This is what you do for a quote living. You didn't just walk in and pull something off. That this is something whether you've been doing it for 20 years or 5 years or 2 months, it's showing physical evidence of consistency. I think think about it. If you put yourself in an employer, in a director's shoes, they're taking a chance. They're making an investment in you, and that's going to cost the company money. Their reputation's on the line. If they hire you and you turn out to be somebody who can't keep up the job, that's reflecting poorly on their choice of artists. So there's a bit of a gamble. Everybody's taking a bit of a gamble with their job. So if you're looking at somebody's work and you can see they've pulled off 10 or 12, that helps the director relax. That helps whoever's employing you know that they're making a good decision, and they can be confident with that decision. So yeah, that's a very big deal. Would you say, could you go overboard with the portfolio? Would you say, presenting 25, 30 pieces, is that overkill? Is there kind of a sweet spot for the number of pieces?
Yes, I would. I would put it about 10. Less than that seems a little fishy, like maybe you don't have enough experience. More than that, it starts getting a little redundant. I mean, if you sat down and showed me a portfolio of 40 different images, like, no,
you don't
I've got
need to,
it. No, that's plenty. So on your online gallery, maybe you have more images out there on your gallery. But if you're actually going to send some images to an art director for, a portfolio pitch, then you don't need to send them your entire gallery. You just have a link to it. If they want to go see some more images, they can go out there and look at them. But just give them the highlight reel from the gallery. And make it specific to what would be applicable to them.
Right.
I mean, if it's a sci-fi company, then don't send them a bunch of anime images, right? That's not really what they care about.
Yeah, and by highlights, you said highlights. Do you mean all of your most recent? Does it have to be your most recent? Would you, like in your portfolio, do you include stuff that might be a couple years old?
I do. Yeah, some of my stuff in my portfolio is maybe, I think I even have something that was about 5 years old.
Yeah.
But it showcases a good aspect of my skills, or it shows a good rounding of the skills.
Yeah.
And that's something else that people forget about is it's not just the skill level, but it's the subject matter that you're covering.
Yeah.
So I see this for a fair bit in some of the consultations that I do. And that is somebody's really good at rendering attractive ladies.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of their stuff is attractive ladies.
Yeah.
And they don't show any men or they don't show any environments.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, you really need to branch out a little bit. I know that's it's not your specialty, but a client probably wants to know whether you can draw a background or a tree or something.
Yeah.
That's something that gets requested of artists a lot.
Yeah.
And it also might be something like lighting. Or so for me, maybe it's a slight, some of the older pieces I might include because there was slight style difference,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe they were a different subject matter that I don't usually cover. I mean, I don't do monsters that often. What is a good monster image? So maybe I'll include it. So that would be kind of a guideline on that. If it still holds up to some of your current work, fine, keep it in there. But you should also be cycling through and try to keep the best stuff on the top.
Yeah, keep it fresh. Yeah, absolutely. I would add to that is, and this is something that really daunts a lot of artists, and this is an entirely other topic in and of itself, but you don't have to be a master of everything. And I think a lot of artists stress themselves out with the idea of having to be an environment professional and having to be a character professional, having to be a creature professional. I've never met a single artist who mastered everything.
Right.
I've met artists that are really good at everything. Can find it if you reference enough and you have the fundamentals down, you can pull off most anything. But generally, artists are recognized for being strong at certain things and weaker at others. Like I would never claim to be the environment artist that Tyler Edlin or Noah Bradley are. They are. Mm-hmm. That is really what that's what their gift is. But I love doing character creature design, and I am recognized for having a certain feel and style, a little bit more, old school, darker feel to my art. That's generally what I do. That's where my creative juices flow. But I have to be able to pull off convincingly, to a professional level, some kind of environment work and integrate natural or architectural pieces or elements into it. And that is important to be able to do that. If you completely can't, well, it's back to the drawing board, technically and literally, right? Yeah. You tend to adhere to more often than not?
Well, it's like fantasy realism. I mean, if you wanted to kind of throw a term on it.
Yeah.
But I've done so much work with magic that my default is the look that magic likes.
Yeah.
I do enjoy using other styles or looks. And if I were to do, more personal pieces, it would be slightly different.
Yeah.
But I mean, you do what the clients ask for and what works for their IP. So,
is magic strict about the look that they're looking for? Do they really control that, or is there a little bit of flexibility between artists?
There is some flexibility. It has changed over time. I mean, certainly if you go back and look at some of the original magic stuff, very simple acrylic paintings, very bright colors, humorous often, was almost comical or cartoonish.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they're looking for something that's far more cinematic.
Yeah.
Realistic and cinematic.
Yeah.
And within that, though, there are a couple of people, Therese Nilsson, if you're familiar with her,
of course.
everybody should go out and check out hers. She does traditional images that are usually more, I would say abstract, but almost like storybook illustrative, lots of design work and kind of collage style. And they're beautiful pieces of art, and they are woefully different than most of the stuff, but people love her. And people love her art. And it's just a really classy style of traditional art.
Yeah.
Aside from that, though, like you're not going to get away with something rendered as if it was for Warcraft.
Yeah.
Right. The overblown shapes, the brighter colors, the slightly more stylized, cartoonish, like that's not going to work. They're not going to accept that.
No.
So there are some variants there, but it has to just be really well done.
Yeah.
And generally towards the realistic side.
So your particular background, your educational background, and just your passion background, what kind of culmination of skills led you to the kind of style that you have today?
Well, I have a background before I got into digital art and traditional art doing portraiture.
Oh, really?
So
Okay.
doing pencil and watercolor and oil were the major ones.
Huh.
And I always loved people.
Yeah.
That's why I got into portraiture and learned a lot about that. And then from there, I always loved also character design. So that's where mine came from. Just characters. So most of my stuff in my portfolio, when I started trying to go professional, was characters. I had a couple of environments or animals or whatever.
Yeah.
But clients saw that and they just kept asking for more characters. So
Yeah.
now that's about the only thing in my portfolio is characters. Yeah.
That's the thing. That's huge what you're saying, because again, and this was both a blessing and a curse in my own career, was because I started off in an animation background. I spent my entire high school, early, up until I got into college where I started to study fine arts, I was very cartoony. That was I had a linear focus on Disney at that point in my life. And breaking that reputation was difficult for me, because I did want to, my natural desire pulled me into realism. And that's, again, for any animators out there, that is not it by any stretch of the imagination a hit on animation. I absolutely love it. I'm as passionate about it as today. I just do different type of stuff today. But that influence kept getting me hired as doing animation style stuff. And despite trying to change my portfolio and update my portfolio, having any animation in my portfolio got me hired, got me calls from animation studios. And it taught me a very valuable lesson that you just mentioned. And that is, whatever you have in your portfolio is what you're going to get hired for.
Yes.
And if you don't want to work, let's say in animation, or if you don't want to do mech designs, get that crap out of your portfolio, because you're going to get calls. And the more you get called, the more artwork you produce, the more professional experience you gain doing that, the more people are going to want to hire you to do it. So in essence, you're hanging yourself, right? And it was hard. There's the ego wants you to say, hey, I can do that too. I can do animation too. I have a degree in it, for God's sakes. And what it took for me to abolish that from my portfolio and say, no, this is really where my heart is. This is where I want to go. I have to camouflage that from my life and say, no, that's not who I am anymore, and get rid of it and eliminate that online presence until I started to get professional work in fantasy illustration, start to get professional work in concept art, work for games. Then I could say, oh yeah, I've done that too. And people, oh, Adam can do animation too. It didn't hinder me though, right? And that's important. You remember that your portfolio is exactly what you want to get hired in. You really have to tailor it to that particular job. So if you want to do what Clint is doing, look at what Clint does. Look at his portfolio. He's a living, breathing example of what's going to get you that job if that's what you're looking for. And make sure that that's the side of yourself that you're presenting, and that it's good, right? That you take that to a professional level. So hugely, hugely valuable stuff. That leads us to kind of a derivative of this subject, and that is, again, working professionally, working for a studio, but working within the confines of a commission outline.
Right.
And this is something that, again, it taps into what we already spoke about, but it is very important. When we do our own thing, we have the freedom, the luxury of being able to do what we feel like doing, and base our work on a narrative that suits our fancy. But again, you walk into a studio, it is very difficult to be given a job, to be given an illustration that perfectly fits the stuff you've already painted.
Right.
And you get a job and they say, I want you to do Robert Baratheon, you know, holding a chicken leg at a table, and you've never drawn tables, you've never drawn chicken legs. You have to research what Robert Baratheon looks like. You have to figure out what the lighting in this particular environment looks like, and you've never done that before. How, Clint, do you adapt to that obstacle? Because that's a big one.
Well, it kind of goes back to what you said first on the other topic, which is you're not going to be a specialist in everything.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest qualities you can have is your ability to learn.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, no matter how long you've been in the industry, somebody is going to hand you an outline of an image to do that you will not know how to do any of those things.
Yep.
And how do you handle it? Well, go out there and start researching.
Yeah.
And trying to understand, for me, it's understand the fundamentals. Everything has a basic form. Everything has a base color. Everything has a material with certain qualities to it. And when you understand that everything is just a different mix of the same basics, then you can start, you know, formulating that.
Yeah.
And then also learn from what other people have done. I don't want to go for plagiarism. That's not a good idea. But other people have solved puzzles very similar to what you're facing.
Yeah.
Go see what they did.
Yeah.
See how they resolved a similar situation with their own piece. And that can save you also time with trying to just mess around yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Steal like an artist, essentially. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Which is huge. And that also taps into something else. And that is what you're describing. I've heard in many different art forms, singing, dancing, cooking, is a successful work of art should generally contain two different ingredients: familiarity, but feel new, right?
Yes.
And familiarity is an important part of it. And us as artists are very sensitive to original creation. And where do you draw that line? Where are you ripping off somebody else's? Taps into the subject of when you're stealing, okay, for lack of a less, jarring term, but when you're stealing from other artists, you don't just steal from one place, you steal from multiple different places. And a good example would be an interview with David Bowie when he was asked, have you ever stolen anything from anybody else? And he goes, oh yeah, I steal stuff all the time. All the time, everything I do is stolen from somebody. And the interviewer he was taken aback by that. And he said, no, you don't understand. I steal from country and from classical, and I steal from cooking, and I steal from driving, and everything. And I just bring it all together. And then at the end, I give it a little bit of that David Bowie magic, and it's mine. And we don't, one of the things that's important to learn as an artist is that creating original pieces is almost never coming up with something out of thin air. Right. It's having always being open to creative elements around your world, the lighting outside on a snowy day, or the sound of a certain song, or a video game, the narrative of a certain video game. You kind of compile that together in a creative way. You create these synapses between different original things, and it creates something new. And you give it your little flair, you give it your render, your polish to make it Clint, something recognizable by Clint, right? And it takes the stress of fashioning things out of thin air. And when you're working for a client, and a client comes to you and says, okay, we need you to do that, the thing that might stress you out is that you're in the abyss and you got to think up all of this stuff out of nowhere, and you have to learn how to be a professional environment artist, and you have to learn how to be a professional vehicle designer and a professional landscape painter, and you don't. What you need to do is you need to tap into those synapses. You got, okay, I need to reference this, I need to reference that, I need to reference that, and pull this together to create something. And if you have that fundamental knowledge that allows you to be able to figure it out and be able to understand the objective shapes and values and colors of things in that context and create something original with it. So it's the element of reference. It's the element of influence. And like you said, looking at other artists and how they resolve certain issues. So you're not, in the end, you actually aren't figuring it out from scratch. In the end, what you're doing is you've learned the art of grabbing, knowing what to grab to pull together the right reference in order to pull something off in the end. And learning that is huge. Learning that is a big deal, because I spent so many years of my career, I'm sure you've dealt with this yourself, is getting hired and then sitting there in the black oubliette of your own imagination, trying to live up to the expectations of a director, thinking that the word reference means cheating. Plagiarizing is taking somebody else's artwork and slapping a new face on it and calling your own. That's not what we're talking about, right?
Right.
Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, well, not much. A couple of thoughts is original ideas are, I want to say, overrated. They're great, but I mean, if you kind of take it to an extreme, if it's something that nobody's ever seen before, this is a concept that's completely new and foreign. Tell you what, nobody will be able to emotionally connect with it.
That's huge.
Because they have no reference point. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
So it's as simple as getting two things that weren't usually connected and connecting them.
Yeah.
And that way you have familiarity from thing one, familiarity from thing two, but yet it's a combination of familiarity and this new thing, because the parts come together to create a new whole.
Right.
And that's your originality. And your creativity is, what things are you going to put together? Or three things or four things. And it's kind of like a chef where they know, okay, this flavor goes with this flavor, doesn't go well with that flavor. And you can put them together in varying degrees, and you have something that, I don't want to say familiar again, but kind of familiar. Like, I know this taste, but it's a little different. It's a little better.
Yeah.
So yeah, along that lines is you can have something that was referenced and also have something that's also original at the same time.
Yeah.
And I will just, to your own people and to my people as well.
Yeah.
I see the same thing. They reference something, they do a great job, they don't take the effort, and it doesn't turn out as well, and then they can't figure out why. So, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a big deal. And that falls back into the whole, if you think about it, as artists, we tend to suffer, and we tend to struggle with certain things that other arts don't. A hip hop artist is expected to follow a certain formula for hip hop. They'll change it up, they'll try something new, and they're celebrated for their little changes. Eminem is not celebrated for singing, for doing hip hop like a classical pianist. He's not expected to. He's expected to follow that formula. He's speaking to a certain culture. And us as artists is the same thing. Learn the culture, learn the artists, learn Clint's work. He comes from a certain world, a certain genre of art. He speaks that language in a way that magic artists really cling to. So learn that language, but give it your own flair, right? Okay. This is a bit of a universal one, but again, this is a topic I get very frequently, which is what to do when you're not motivated to paint, when you're just having a crap day, you don't feel it, just, bad weather day. What can I tell you? But you're still expected to work. Or maybe you're not expected to work, but you feel the pressure of needing to stay productive. How do you handle that one?
One is you got to keep in mind what your goal is. And if your goal is just what you're going to produce today, then it might not be enough to motivate you.
Yeah.
So keep your eye on the further target, the bigger target. That'll help you a little bit. Also, for me, it is finding inspiration. There are things that inspire me to want to paint.
Yeah.
So maybe it's going out and looking at some of my favorite pieces of art. I'll go back, look at what I've downloaded recently and be like, dude, that's cool. That's cool. That's cool. And it kind of psychs me up a little bit. It gives me a little energy looking at those sources of inspiration. And maybe I go out and watch a video, watch somebody else paint for a little while, and just, okay, that's the process. That's the process. And that's one way if you're going to just try to psych yourself up. Otherwise, a lot of it comes down to just, determination. It's just habit. You get in the habit of, you sit down every day at this time and you draw for a certain amount of time. And that takes longer because you have to have already developed that habit.
Yeah.
But for you, what do you do? What's some of your major ways
a lot of what you're saying
motivated?
as well. Yeah. Well, habit's a big one too. Habit's a big thing. Think about it like going to the gym. If you go to the gym once a week, and then the next week you go twice, and then the next week you go 5 times, and then the next week you go 1, you're not training your brain at a certain time at a certain place to do something. And for me, running a school, for me, knowing that I have to produce weekly videos on YouTube is my incentive to keep going. It's what pushes me to keep going, and it's what gets me into that habit. So if I don't, I feel the gap. I don't know what the hell to do with myself at that time, because usually I'll be painting at that time. So that habit feeds itself. But also, like I just mentioned as well, it's the obligation. I find that if you stay hidden in your little cubbyhole and you're only painting for yourself, there's no accountability to what you're doing. There's nobody else is waiting on you to produce something. Motivating yourself for the sake of just painting, for the sake of painting, it might not be enough for you. And I think that one of the things that feeds me artistically are my viewers on YouTube, are my students.
Yes.
Because they have an expectation of me. It's a lot easier for me to let myself down than it is to let everybody else down. You know, I'd much rather throw myself under the bus than everybody else. So knowing that every week people are waiting and expecting me to produce something is what gets me up. It gets me moving. And the same thing could be said for an employer, or the same thing could be said for a future employer, where I'm producing artwork for somebody who will have certain expectations of me. That expectation of me is what helps to push me. Yeah.
There's another idea that I have in the back of my mind. If there hits a day where I'm not feeling like I want to be productive, there's 2 real options. Either you're going to or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you're not going to, then just own it. Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a day off. That's just human.
Yeah.
And don't feel guilty about it. If you can, I would say, if you keep running into that, then schedule some time off.
Yeah.
Like, I am going to be off for this time. I'm not going to feel guilty about it. This is where I go and recharge, and it's okay because I've planned for it.
Yeah.
But if you're not, then somebody else is going through the same thing on the same day. And they are not going to give in. They're going to work, and they're going to get ahead. Are you going to keep up?
Yeah.
Are you going to get ahead as well, or are you going to let them pass you? And it's sort of a competitive thing to do, and I'm generally not a very competitive person, but it reminds me of that because you're talking about, your students and your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I see these guys out there, younger guys, maybe the older guys that are new to the industry, working their butts off, trying to do this. And I know they are. And while I'm good enough now to stay, employed and make a living at this, I have to keep working too.
Yeah.
And I've got to stay where I am. I've got to keep learning.
Yeah.
You will always be forgetting a little bit. You will always be losing a little bit. And you have to work in order just to stay even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you keep that up over the long term, though? Like, wouldn't you imagine? I can imagine for somebody who's in their early 20s and they're full of piss and vinegar and they're, they're very ambitious and stuff. Great. They've got a big target right in front of their face, and that's really helping to, that's putting wind in their sails. But what if you've been doing this for 20 years, and you worked your ass off your whole life, and you've got 3 kids and you're wiped out, and, how do you keep going then?
Well, it's imperative if you start looking at brain science, original stimulus is really important to the brain. It needs new challenges and it needs the chance to try to find new solutions to those challenges.
Yeah.
So one of the greatest reasons the human brain will go downhill as you get older is that you just keep doing the same thing all the time.
Yeah.
So I see it as allowing yourself to make side steps. You've already done it. You went from animation to illustration. And first recognize that you and your interest will change as you get older. And that is good. And that is okay.
Yeah.
And maybe you had your heart absolutely set on animation and Disney or similar when you were younger, and that's everything that meant to you. But as you get older, you're like, it's not as fulfilling as I want. It's not going to take me in the direction, you know, that I want anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change.
Yeah.
Do it. I mean, I was in graphic design for years, and it's like, no, you know, I've done this for 7 years, and it's not that rewarding anymore. I need to get out of this.
Yeah. You know, you're saying that, and there was a bit of a heartbreak that, or at least I feared a heartbreak in making that transition, because I was identified so much as an animator. You know, all through high school, Adam the cartoonist. That's how I was recognized. And it took a long time for me to give myself permission to move on from there, because I felt like I was almost betraying myself or betraying my reputation in a sense doing that. But I had to do it. And you see a lot of great artists do that all the time. You know, like it's like Peter Jackson, who's so recognized for Lord of the Rings, but screw it, I want to do something sci-fi. Yeah. And a lot of the critics are going to say, you know, he's losing, he's lost his stride. No, he's not lost his stride. He's keeping himself fresh. He's keeping himself moving forward. Yes, I changed. Yes, it took some courage to redefine myself, to reinvent myself to a certain degree. But I never, looking back now, I am so grateful I did. Right. But I'm also grateful for my background in animation, and I realized I didn't betray myself. I grew. It's a growth process, you know? So don't be afraid of change, but I would, for the sake of balance, I would say, you have to give yourself a chance. You have to make a short-term, but solid commitment to whatever decision you need to make in your life, because what a lot of artists do, and I see this with people, is they keep reinventing themselves every year. You know, try a little bit of line art, trying a little bit of 3D, trying a little bit of this. No, you have to get good enough at something. You have to give something a fair chance to know if it's something that A, you like on the long term, and B, something that's fulfilling. Because if you keep changing, you kind of try something, and you know, like I just started playing the drums, for instance. I've been practicing now for a week. I'm learning my paradiddles, right? And when I first picked up the drum set, I bought this little kind of mesh drum kit, and I first started playing, and I sucked. And I picked up the drumsticks, and it's just a mess. It just sounds like crap, and I don't even know where to sit, and everything sounded terrible. And whenever I'd hit the drumstick, it would make this terrible sound. And my gut instinct was to say, you know what, I'm just going to return the drum set. You know, I'll get my money back for it. And but I did a couple of practices, and then I started to get the right rhythm for it, and it started to feel. I realized, how do you hold the sticks properly? And once I started to make good sounds, when my drums actually started to sound more musical, even though I'm a complete utter amateur, I suck. There was this little bit of satisfaction. There was a little bit of glee that came from, I'm actually making these drums sound decent, right? By my standards. Next year, I'm gonna laugh at myself. But right now, there was the satisfaction of growth, and that ties right back into what you're saying about learning something new. Learning something new doesn't mean becoming a professional. Learning something new is just about integrating that new little ingredient into an already existing recipe. And to me, even that is a complete beginner discovery I made versus what I do now as a professional artist. It's still another ingredient. I'm just at a different phase in the process, but that keeps it fresh. It's that learning something new keeps it fresh. It's what sparks that excitement and reminds you that you are passionate, and reminds you that there is growth. And keep doing that. Keep learning something new. Keep exposing yourself to different things. And that is what picks you up and makes you look forward to producing your next pieces because you can apply something you didn't realize existed only 48 hours before. Yeah.
Yeah, you're completely right. We're not talking about, oh, I tried cartoons this week and it didn't work well, so I'm going to try something next week.
Yeah.
No, we're talking about you do something for maybe 5 years, 10 years. This is the groove of what you do, who you are. And then you just start feeling like your interest is waning and you need to step out and do something else. Yeah. And for art, there's a lot of different stuff in the world of art, and you can step around from animation to illustration to concept to murals to whatever your whole life and never run out of great areas to work in.
Yeah.
So, it took me a while before I was okay with that, and just realize what I wanted then doesn't mean it has to be what I want now.
Yeah.
And that I am myself a work in progress.
Yeah.
And just because I got into this field and I'm doing this work doesn't mean that that's where I have to stay. That's not where my ceiling is. I can go to a different room. I can find a different ceiling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That also, by the way, translates into your art, doesn't it? I remember watching years ago, I was watching a video by Marco Bucci, and he was talking about don't get too precious with your art, which is a lesson we need to learn as artists, right? We make that first brushstroke and we adhere to it. We commit to that brushstroke, and we create our own confines artistically. Right. And when you can look at a piece, even if you've spent 72 hours working on an arm, and if that arm doesn't work, you have to be able to look at yourself objectively, look at what you painted objectively and said, no, take some white paint and just wash it out, start over from scratch. Don't overcommit. Commit, but don't commit to the point where it stops growth, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's huge. I'm so glad I asked you. I'm very happy with that. All right, so listen, I think that we've filled the cup beyond the brim already, but I just wanted to mention before we close up today that Clint, if you don't know him, then crawl out from under that rock that you've been under all these years. But Clint has his own YouTube channel, of course, called SWATCHES. I'll leave a link in the description below. He also has a Patreon, which is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. So definitely go and support his work there. And is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I look forward to maybe doing this again. And we'd love to get your guys' comments. What's your input? How would you address some of these questions as well? Drop them in the video comments below. And if you have ideas for future topics that you would like to maybe throw in the bag, if this is popular, then we would be interested in continuing it. So let us know.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And again, Clint, a huge thank you for joining me on my channel today. It's a huge treat and a day I'll remember forever. Thank you so much. And happy painting, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Happy painting. Enjoyed it.
Take care, guys.
Adios.